After finishing my visit to Austin, I started to make my way toward the Texas Hill Country and the Lyndon B. Johnson National Historic Park. But first I traveled to the small town of Lockhart, Texas. Lockhart is about 35 miles from Austin and is officially recognized as the barbecue capital of Texas. And of course, I had to sample some real Texas barbecue. I had lunch at Kreitz Market, and then I visited Black's Barbecue and picked up an order to take with me for supper. I must say, everything was delicious, and it lived up to the billing. Best barbecue in Texas. After lunch, I made my way across Texas Highway 32, crossing the Devil's Backbone toward Johnson City, and the Lyndon Johnson National Historic Park. The LBJ National Park is split between two sites, the Boyhood home and Johnson Settlement in Johnson City, and the LBJ Ranch in nearby Stonewwall. A young Lyndon Johnson moved to this house with his parents Sam and Rebecca in 1913 when he was 5 years old. For the next 25 years, Lyndon lived here and developed his everlasting love for the Texas Hill Country. While living here, Lyndon's father was elected to the Texas legislature. While traveling with his father on the campaign trail, young Lyndon would learn the necessary skills to become a successful politician. In March of 1937, Lyndon Baines Johnson stood on the front porch of this home and announced that he would be running for the United States House of Representatives. He won the election and began a political career that would last for more than 30 years. The site offers guided tours of the home's interior, which features a number of artifacts that belong to the Johnson family, along with other period pieces. A photo of a very young Lyndon hangs in the bedroom that he shared with his brother Sam. After completing my visit to the Boyhood home, it's a short walk down this path to Johnson Settlement. It was here in the 1850s that Sam Johnson Sr., who was President Johnson's grandfather, settled with his brother Tom in a cabin on 320 acres. This became the base of one of the largest cattle driving operations in the Hill Country. And in the years after the Civil War, the success of the Johnson brothers allowed them to expand, adding another 640 acres. By the early 1870s, the market was flooded with Texas cattle, and Sam and Tom was forced to dissolve their partnership and move to Blanco County. When President Johnson retired from politics, he donated funds to the National Park Service, who purchased a settlement. The dog trot cabin, barn, and cooler house were still standing and appear today just as they did over 100 years ago. By following the mile-long path over mostly level ground, I was able to visit each of the original buildings, along with seeing Texas longhorns and the other animals that are housed on the property today. I wrapped up my visit to LBJ's Boyhood home and Johnson Settlement with a visit to the small museum located inside the Visitor Center. The museum features several artifacts relating to President Johnson, including a rocking chair that he used in the Oval Office and the table that he used to sign his landmark education bill. It's about 15 miles from LBJ's Boyhood home to the second part of the Lyndon Johnson National Historic Park, which features the LBJ Ranch and the Texas White House. In order to access the ranch and the national park, I had to travel through the Lyndon Johnson State Park and had to stop at the State Park Visitor Center to pick up a free driving pass. After driving through a portion of the state park, I crossed the Pedernales River and arrived at the LBJ Ranch. Immediately upon entering the national park is the one-room Junction School. It was here in 1912 that a young Lyndon Johnson began his formal education, and it was here 53 years later, on April 11th, 1965, that he would return to sign his landmark Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which was one of more than 60 education bills passed during his time as president. Just a short drive from the school is the reconstructed birthplace of our 36th president. The original dog-trot house was built in 1889 by the president's grandfather, Sam Ely Johnson Sr. The future president spent the first 5 years of his life here before his family moved to nearby Johnson City. The original house was torn down in the 1940s, but in 1964, President Johnson had the house we see today built at the site of the original house. Moving on from the birthplace, I made my way through the ranch and past the 6,300-foot runway that was built so President Johnson could bring Washington to Texas. President Johnson would often fly from Washington to either Austin or San Antonio on the larger Boeing 707 and then board a smaller Jetstar for the short hop over to the ranch. One of the Lockheed VC-140 Jetstars used by President Johnson during his time in office is on display near the entrance to the Texas White House. The centerpiece of the LBJ Ranch is the house that was the home of President and Mrs. Johnson from 1951 until their death. The home became known as the Texas White House because President Johnson spent more than 20% of his time as president here at the ranch. It was not uncommon for the president to gather his cabinet and have meetings while sitting in lawn chairs under the live oaks in the front yard of the house. Following President Johnson's death in 1973, Mrs. Johnson continued to live here until her death in 2007. President Johnson deeded the property to the National Park Service, and following Mrs. Johnson's death in 2007, the Park Service began preparation to open the ranch to the public. The LBJ Ranch and the Texas White House officially opened to the public in 2008. Visitors should note that there is absolutely no photography or video allowed inside the house, and this rule is strictly enforced. Following my guided tour of the house, I was free to walk about the grounds and visit the grove of live oaks in front of the house where President Johnson would host barbecues and entertain guests on the banks of the Pedernales River. For many years, this low-water bridge served as the primary access to the LBJ Ranch. It also served as a source of entertainment and amusement for President Johnson, as he would often take guests for spins around the ranch, which would almost always end, to the fright and surprise of his passengers, with the president's beating down the dirt road and across this water-covered bridge. President Johnson loved to entertain here at the ranch, and he would often ask his guests to place their names in cement. The friendship stones, as the president would call them, were then installed in the backyard here at the Texas White House. President Johnson loved his cars, and he had a wide variety of some very unique vehicles that he used around the ranch, including this Cushman golf cart that he would use to shuttle visitors from the landing strip to the Texas White House. One of the president's favorite vehicles was his antique fire truck that was presented to him in 1964 by the community of Brady, Texas. The tanks and hoses were removed and replaced with benches so the president could use it to take visitors and world leaders on tours of his ranch. When he was at the ranch, the president would relish the opportunity to drive his own cars, including these 1966 and 1967 Lincoln Continentals. He could often be seen driving around the ranch and the roads of the hill country to visit friends and neighbors. One of the most unique cars in President Johnson's collection was his amphibious car. The president often took unsuspecting guests on a tour of the LBJ Lake near the ranch. As he neared the water, the president would yell that he had no brakes and go splashing into the water. The president would roar with laughter as the car would begin to float and move about the lake. The life of our 36th president came full circle here in the hill country of Texas. He was born here on August 27, 1908, and when he died on January 22, 1973, he was laid to rest just across the road from his birthplace in the Johnson family cemetery. President Johnson, his wife Lady Bird, along with his parents and other members of his family, are resting in the shade of the live oaks that the president loved so much. This concludes my tour of the Lyndon Johnson National Historic Park. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up. And if you want to keep up with my travels, be sure to subscribe. For now, it's time for me to head on down the road and see what's around the bend.